good morning. Thanks for coming in at this wonderful hour to listen to me talk about international law. In fact, I do this quite a bit. I've talked at about 125 different law schools, probably 300 times on this topic. I think this is probably my third or fourth time here at U of A. So I appreciate you guys coming on in, and realize that a number of you have to leave kind of throughout. So for those of you that can stay, please do. For those of you that need to leave at 8:30 or 8:45 or whenever, I will talk fast. So today what I want to do is I want to talk to you about international law, and I want to talk to you about exactly what it is and opportunities in this area, things you can get involved in now, and things that might be awaiting you after graduation as well. But what I want to do is this, is just like any good lawyer, I want to kick things off with disclaimers. And I'm guessing you probably know what a disclaimer is. If not, you still have some studying left to do. Welcome, good morning, here at the University of Akron. But my first disclaimer is it actually relates to my looks. And you might be wondering what's going on. But when people find out that I have over 20 years experience in the world of international business and international law, they're a little surprised. When they find out that I have 4 children and my oldest is 19 years old, they're even more surprised because I've been told that I look like I'm about 25. So my first disclaimer is that I didn't get married when I was 10, and I didn't go to law school when I was 12. Looks can be deceiving. So that's my first disclaimer. Second one relates to the fact that, by trade I am a commercial litigator, and we do it on an international scale. And when I was litigating, I used to jump around quite a bit. I would do it to keep the other side off guard so they wouldn't know where I was going. The witness didn't know what questions I was going to ask. Today, I promise you I will jump around. But it's not to confuse you, rather it's to get a lot of information in the short period of time that I have with you today. Now, third disclaimer. I had hoped in flying in from, I guess I flew in from Minnesota last night technically, but coming from Denver, I am an associate dean and a law professor at the University of Wyoming. We're 2 hours north of Denver, high in the Rocky Mountains at 7,200 feet above sea level. I had hoped to bring a jar full of slips of paper, and I could pass that jar around, and as it went past your seat, you could pull out a slip, and there it might have your dream job, one that would allow you to combine your interest in the law with things that are international. Maybe take you around the world on somebody else's dime, introduce you to people from different cultures and different countries and different nations, a little bit of international intrigue as well. Unfortunately, that jar doesn't exist. In fact, it would be so nice if that's how easy it was to get a job in any industry, but it's not. So what I'm doing today is I want to give you some ideas, thoughts, tips, feedback, some stuff that I've seen, some things that I've done, so you can fill up your jar with ideas and draw upon those as you look for opportunities in this area. Fourth disclaimer is, in doing that, I want to share kind of my background and experience and story with you. Because I think giving you kind of a concrete idea of some of the things that you can do might help you in understanding what international law is and some of the opportunities that are out there. So I didn't come here to say, hey, look at Professor Wilson and what I've done, ooh and ah, because I believe that what I've done really isn't anything special, but it's stuff that you guys can do as well. So with the disclaimers out of the way, let's begin. And before I do that, just a couple of administrative things. One is, I actually have an international law kind of newsletter that I try and send around a couple times a year. If you're interested in getting that, getting some of the ideas that I don't get to today, please feel free to sign up. If not, pretend it's a do not call list and just pass it along. Second thing is about scientific studies show about 3 minutes into a speaker's presentation may have made their first impression for better or worse. So since I can do no worse, I'm going to get a little comfortable and lose my suit coat here. And let's talk about international law and things along those areas. And I guess the first question that I'd like to ask is, how many of you have ever been abroad? All right. I think just about all of you. Not a prerequisite to practicing law in this area, not at all. But it's one of those things where, if you go abroad, maybe you had the same experience as I did when I was 19 and I first went overseas. I caught a disease. Now that disease is not something that doctors can treat, but it's a disease that, once you're overseas, there's just something that's intriguing. I mean, new culture, new people, new experiences, a whole bunch of new things. And when I was 19, I volunteered to do missionary work for my church. And don't get a dime from the church, do it for 2 years. In exchange for paying for it yourself, you don't get to choose where you go. So I mean, I could have gone to Ohio or Texas or Florida, but my church sent me to northern Japan. And you know, at the time, my family and friends were really excited for me. I was terrified. I didn't know much about Japan at all. In fact, you know, my thought was this. I mean, they speak this really difficult language over in Japan. There was no way I was going to learn that. I didn't know much about Japan, except I knew that they liked to eat rice. I hated rice. I thought it tasted like cardboard. Over 20 years ago when this was happening, you know, sushi, sashimi, that raw fish, it was not words in the English language. So my fear was I would go overseas, be starving to death, unable to tell somebody that I needed some real food. But with a higher purpose in store, off I went. And what I discovered was that fascinating culture, interesting people. The systems were different. I mean, it was a whole new world that was out there. And you know, from a very young age, I had wanted to be a lawyer. But now I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to combine my newfound interest in things that are international with my long-term interest in the law? Become an international lawyer. Problem was this. I didn't know what international law was. I didn't know any international lawyers. I didn't even know where to begin. And my first tip to you is, you know, there's no one right way to do this. There are many, many ways. Maybe you have some international experience that you can build upon. Maybe you don't have any, and now's the time to start to build. But you know, there are opportunities in this world of international law, and I'll get to what it is, everywhere. So I want you to be creative, think outside of the box, and go down this path. And let me share with you what I did and what I discovered. I decided that to start a practice, or I guess to get involved in this area, I would go back to Japan after my missionary service, and I would work for a Japanese company, maybe a multinational, get some international business experience. Maybe that would introduce me to international lawyers, or at least expose me to the area so that I could build upon that later. And I want to share with you my job search experience. Not because it necessarily relates to international law per se, but because it taught me a valuable lesson. In fact, that lesson has kind of become my motto or my creed. You know, Nike has their motto. It's 3 words. You all know it, right? Just do it. Just do it. See, you guys function well early in the morning. Professor Wilson's is even easier than that. It's 2 words. Distinguish myself. Now, I want to talk to you about the importance of distinguishing yourself. And I'm guessing that many of you, even though you might not have thought about it in those terms, that's what you're doing here at Akron, is you're looking to become a lawyer to distinguish yourself. Now granted, some of you might be here just for the academic exercise. Others of you might be here just to blow the cash. But I'm guessing that you're looking to distinguish yourself somehow. And you know, if you can distinguish yourself, it will lead to opportunities that you might not have had before. It will allow you to get into places that your colleagues don't have access to once you distinguish yourself. And let me tell you a little bit of my experience looking for a job in international business. As I was looking in Japan, I found a posting for a company that makes hydrological and meteorological instruments. They wanted somebody to do their technical translating and their international marketing. Now, when you search for a job, oftentimes there are challenges. Maybe you're one of the select few that walk into a room and everybody melts and they just hand you that piece of paper with your dream job. But I'm guessing it probably takes more than that for each and every one of you, including me. And here I was, I wanted this job, but I had all these challenges that were stacked against me. I mean, one, they wanted somebody to do technical translating. I really couldn't read and write Japanese. That was a problem. International marketing, I had no experience. Undergraduate degree, I didn't have one of those. Hydrological and meteorological instruments, I could barely say that, let alone knew what they were. And here I am in my early 20s, as you might imagine. I probably looked like I was 12. I mean, how could I find that job? So I thought, I need to distinguish myself. And you know, as you're looking for jobs, think of ways to distinguish yourself from others. I thought this. Well, if I'm looking for a job in Japan, even though they're looking for a native English speaker, I should put together my resume in Japanese. Mind you, I couldn't read and write it, so I had to have somebody else do it. But once it was done, it looked really good. And I sent it off. You know what? It got me an interview. Problem was, is I knew that if I didn't avoid those poison questions in the interview, like, can you read and write Japanese? Do you have experience? Can you do the job, right? All of which I would have to say no or I don't know to. There was no way I was going to land this job. So, what was my strategy? Well, I didn't know what to do, but I was thinking, I've got to find a way to distinguish myself. My plan became this. I was going to ask the interviewer more questions than the interviewer asked me, to dominate that interview, to show, hey, I've got what you want. And so that's what I did. Problem was I was running out of material. And so I asked the question, is there anything that I would be doing after company hours? The response was this: we're just like a family here. We go out to dinner together, we sing karaoke together, we have company picnics, we have company bowling outings. You know, we even have a company baseball team. There was my chance to shine. I quickly pointed out that from the age of 3, I had played baseball. In fact, if they wanted to hire me, I could bat leadoff for them, play third base, and if they were looking for a pitcher, I bragged that in one game in high school, I struck out 15 batters with my wicked curveball. Now, as strange or as funny as that might sound, the interviewer, his eyes were glowing. So much so that he walked over to the wall, he picked up the phone, and I heard him whisper, hey, we've got this American guy in here. He can pitch on our baseball team. Before you know it, I'm being led up 3 flights of stairs to the president's office, where for the next hour we talked about how we could implement American baseball strategy on their company team to help them win the corporate series. I was hired, and they never asked me those questions. And it taught me, you know, this is the only time, by the way, that baseball's ever got me a job, but it taught me, as crazy as it might sound, if you can find something different from the other candidates, you can get into an area that maybe you didn't have access to before. I mean, I shouldn't have been in that place, but it got my foot in the door. It gave me the opportunity to go out and prove myself. Now, mind you, regardless of how good my curveball was, if I couldn't have done the job, I'm sure they would have fired me. But the second thing that it taught me was, if you can get international experience on your resume, it will distinguish you from your peers. When you go to interviews, instead of people asking you what type of a vegetable would you be and why, they will be asking you about what you've done. It will allow you to get there. And you know, in today's world, there's so much globalized stuff that's around. You know, people think, hey, I don't do international law, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you know what? Everybody does. In fact, I mean, if you look at your laptops, your cell phones, your clothes, you know, the stuff that you do, it's probably not made here in the United States, right? It's made overseas. Now, do we have any 2Ls and 3Ls in here? All right. Any 1Ls? All right, good. So 1Ls, you're probably just kind of getting there. 2Ls and 3Ls, here's your test, right? If you've got 2 Ohio companies that enter into a contract, what law governs?
Ohio.
Ohio law, right? We're talking about the sale of goods. What law governs that?
UCC.
The UCC. Now let's say that an Ohio company is transacting business with a company in Canada. Does the UCC govern? Ohio law still does.
No.
What law does? Do you know? There's a treaty called the
UN treaty.
UN treaty called the Convention for the International Sale of Goods. All right, it's something that's completely different. If you know about the CISG, I mean, just in that one little area, that's what law applies. I've seen attorneys go, Ohio law applies. They think that the UCC is where it's at, but really it's the CISG, which is completely different than the UCC. That's the law that applies. You know, if you can learn about these things while you're in law school, you can impress potential employers, you can find new clients, ones that aren't accessible, you can prove yourself to others, and these experiences that I talked about earlier on, they will be available to you. It's amazing the world that's out there, and so there are ways and things for you to go and do. So let me talk to you about my law school experience, kind of fast forward ahead. I worked for that company for a couple of years. I decided to build upon my international experience and got a job with Sony Group in their professional audio and video department doing technical translating. And I came back to the United States to go to law school. And I was looking for a law school that I thought could introduce me to international lawyers and to you know, international law in general. And so I ended up actually next door in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, at a law school called Temple University. They've actually got a campus in Tokyo where, you know, together with other law students from other law schools, you know, you can go and actually study on their campus during your 2L or your 3L year during spring semester. And I thought that would be great because there's international classes there, international lawyers. You can spend like 5 months there, maybe do an international internship. So I thought, wow, I can go to Temple. They'll be able to introduce me to international law and international lawyers. So first week of law school, I walk into career services and I announce, my name is Matt Wilson. I want to be an international lawyer. Show me how. And they looked at me and said, well, we haven't seen you around these parts. You must be a 1L. And I proudly announced that I was. And I said, well, we don't talk to 1Ls individually until November 1st. So I said, okay, November 1st at 9 a.m. I will be back. Mark me down. That day, I went back, sat down with the director of career services, And I said, I want to be an international lawyer, show me how. And you know what I heard that day? Silence. In fact, I started to panic. I'm going, oh no, I've moved thousands of miles here. You're not going to be able to tell me? Finally, after what seemed to be just kind of an eternal silence, the director told me two things. First thing she said is this: there's no such thing as international law. All right, now I'm really starting to panic. What did she mean? Certainly she was wrong. Now, mind you, what she was teaching me, I just kind of want to share with you. Because a lot of times, if you go out to somebody and you say you want to practice international law, it doesn't register to them as attorneys, because they think that they don't do international law. To them, international law is negotiating treaties between nations. Maybe it's working for an international organization like the United Nations or the World Court, maybe the World Bank. Maybe it's doing international human rights law, working with NGOs. And you know what? There are job opportunities that are out there in that area that I like to call public international law. Kind of the relationships between nations and states, and there are things that are there. And some of the tips I'm going to talk to you about might allow you to get into those if that's what you're interested in. But you know what? There is so much more. Let me go back to the idea that I was just throwing out to you as far as the transaction of goods. Any area of the law that's out there today has an international aspect to it. So instead of saying you want to practice international law, in my case, I wanted to do international litigation. Litigation involving parties of multiple countries. There are things like international intellectual property law, cross-border mergers and acquisitions. Immigration you could even throw into that. International finance, international tax. Anything that is out there today is going to have, in our global world, something that's internationalized. And finding out about it, getting immersed in it, is the challenge that you have, but it's something that you can do. In fact, let me just give you an example, all right? I live in Wyoming. Been there for 3 years, located there from Tokyo. When I moved from Tokyo to Wyoming, everybody was saying, why are you going to Wyoming? There's no international law there. Two things. One, it's everywhere. Remember that. Two, it'll find you, all right? So, let me give you an example. A city of 3,000. You would think no international law stuff involved. I actually had a call the other day from a couple of Wyoming attorneys, and they told me this story. We've got a client. The client had constructed a new home, put carbon monoxide detectors in the home. Unfortunately, that detector malfunctioned. The girls got carbon monoxide poisoning. Very, very unfortunate. So they decided, we need to sue to help the girls, be compensated for their damages. So they did some investigation. It turns out that this carbon monoxide detector was designed and partially manufactured in Japan, shipped to Mexico where the manufacturing was completed. It was imported in the United States, sold in Colorado, bought by the construction worker that was actually there, come on in, and then it was installed in the house. Now mind you, one of the subjects that I teach is torts. If your torts professor asked you who you sued in that hypothetical situation, what's your answer?
Every single one of them.
You guys are great. Every single one of them, right? Boy, that's exactly what it is. So how do you sue the company in Japan? What happens when the Japanese company's insurer gets involved? How do you sue the company in Mexico? Assuming you can get jurisdiction and you've got them going in U.S. court, let's say that all of their assets are located overseas. How do you reach those assets? Can you do that? All of these things were questions that they were asking me. Even something as simple as how do we serve this Japanese company or the Mexican company if they don't have a presence here in the United States? These are things that come up every single day that you guys, if you are tuned into, will be able to be involved with. And it's interesting, interesting stuff. So, I mentioned to you, well, and hopefully you're kind of getting an idea of this idea of what international law is and the differences that are there. But let me jump back to the Career Services Office, because remember I said she told me two different things. Second thing she told me was this: Matt, if you want to do international litigation, the only place that I know where to direct you to is these big firms in big cities in the U.S. Maybe if they've got an office overseas, if you go to work for them, maybe you'll interact with that office. That could be considered international. Maybe you could even work for them for a little bit. You could request a transfer to their overseas office, and if you're overseas, whatever you're doing is international law. I said, is that the only way? She said, that's the only way that I know. So being the naive 1L that I was, I decided, okay, I will find these law firms and send my resumes off to them. And I found 30 of them in New York that had offices over in Asia or Europe. And I sent my resume off. Now, 2Ls and 3Ls, maybe you've experienced this if you've ever applied to a law firm. 1Ls, You have this experience to look forward to. But what I found is if you're interested in working for a law firm, they're really kind, caring, compassionate, loving. So much so that when you send their resumes, you send your resumes to them, they will take valuable time out of their busy schedule and write you an individualized letter back on very expensive stationery, really nice envelopes. In fact, out of 30 of these that I sent off, I got 30 of these love letters back. They sounded something like this. Dear Mr. Wilson, congratulations on all of your accomplishments in the past, but we're not interested in you. Now, when that 30th letter came back, I put my head on my wife's shoulder and I started to complain, saying, oh no, this means I have to practice family law. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I went to law school to do international litigation. I didn't want to settle for something that I didn't want to do. Now, I could have done that, and I've since found out, I kind of pick on family law a little bit because I'm not interested in it, but I've actually found out that there's international aspects of that too that I've actually had some clients approach me about as well. So it's all around you. But you know what? The only door that I had been shown was closed. What would I do? I wanted to get some international experience. And so I encourage you to make the best of it and do whatever you can to get involved in things that are international. So this is what I did. I looked outside of the box. I decided I was going to look for internships for 1Ls overseas. Think I found any? No. In fact, this is kind of, to date myself, this is kind of like the early years of the internet. I mean, to get a dial-up connection to Lexus, it took like 15 minutes even just to log on. So there really wasn't much. I mean, today you can at least, there are resources for you. You can go to the American Bar Association website, the International Law section. There's a list of law firms overseas that are interested in hiring U.S. law students. You can go to different state bar associations. They have international law sections. You can tap into those. You might be able to find some jobs online. One website that I like is Indeed.com, INDEED.com. I go there and just type in like Japanese and lawyer, get subscribed to their list, and almost every day they send me updates on things that relate to Japan and lawyers here in the United States. I mean, there are opportunities that are out there, but don't stop there. Be creative, because everybody's looking at websites, so think about what you can do. My next strategy was this. Let me look for any type of international work. It doesn't matter if it's an internship, I don't care. Because my theory was, if I found a position for a secretary, a paralegal, an attorney, something that was related to an international jurisdiction or international stuff here in the United States, that maybe I could talk myself into a job. I was thinking, somebody's hiring, it means one, business is good, so maybe they would have more, or two, maybe it would take them a little time to find somebody to hire, and I could sneak in the back door. I like back doors, all right? Sneak in the back door and help them out while they were looking. And so as I was looking for a position, I found a posting in a place called Micronesia. Has anybody heard of Micronesia? Do you know where it is? Anybody?
It's Malaysia now, isn't it?
No, actually, it's not even part of the mainland. You would think that's kind of it, but it's a set of islands that's out in the Western Pacific. And as I started to look at this posting, it was for the exotic firm of White, Pierce, Mailman, and Nutting. And I went, that doesn't sound very exotic. Tropical island with a name like that. I looked at it and it said the island of Saipan. And it turns out that Saipan is the capital of the U.S. Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. It's just north of Guam. So it's just like Puerto Rico. There are U.S. citizens there, U.S. currency, U.S. Postal Service, U.S. federal agencies are there. There's a U.S. District Court on the island that's part of the Ninth Circuit, just like California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington. I went, wow, that's fascinating. I wonder what they do. Well, research showed that they do a lot of international trade, international commerce, Asian tourism. Sounded all interesting to me. A little more research revealed they have a lot of the important things in life. Costco, Tony Roma's Ribs, Hard Rock Cafe, and Verizon 5 cents a minute long distance to the mainland. I went, wow, I want this job. Now, notice the disconnect there, right? This is an attorney position. I'm a 1L. You know, I can't pick up the phone and call my, talk to him about my baseball experience. That's not going to work, right? I mean, how am I going to do this? But I thought, let me try. Try stuff like this. It might work. In fact, what I did was I sent my cover letter and my resume off. Now, I knew that I had to find a way to distinguish myself just beyond that, just beyond being a piece of paper. So I decided I was going to pick up the phone and call. And I would encourage you in your job searches, pick up the phone and call, particularly when you're dealing with somebody overseas. I have found that attorneys, U.S. attorneys that are practicing law overseas, or even foreign ones, are inclined to talk to you. I always wondered if they were lonelier than ones here. I don't think that's the case. I think many times they're friendlier and they're open to these ideas, and so they will talk to you. But I didn't know that. I mean, at the time, you know, I'd never talked to an international lawyer. My concern was if I picked up the phone and called, wouldn't I be seen as pushy and aggressive, and they wouldn't like that? I mean, even if I called, how could I get past the secretary to talk to the attorney that I needed to talk to? I didn't know, but I knew I needed to try. And you can do it. Come up with a strategy. My strategy was to create a sense of urgency. It works in negotiations, so I thought it might work on the phone. So I picked up the phone and I called and I said, "Hello, this is Matt Wilson. I've been corresponding with Mr. White," he's a senior partner, "about a very important legal matter." That's my resume. "Since I'm calling long distance from the United States, since I'm calling long distance about a very important legal matter, will you please put me through?" The voice on the other end of the line said, "Oh, legal matter, United States, let me put you through." Before you know it, I was talking to Mr. White, seeing if he had gotten my resume, talking to him about the internship, asking him about his practice, talking to him about me. We talked for 45 minutes. No longer was I just a random resume, a piece of paper that had come in the door. I was a story, I was a voice, I had talked to him. In fact, at the end of the conversation, he said this. He said, "Matt, I'd never thought about the internship idea. We're still interviewing for that position. We haven't found the right person. We're swamped. Let me talk to my partners and see what they think about the internship idea." Before you know it, my wife and my daughter and I were on a plane on our way to a tropical island where I spent my 1L summer. And you might ask me what I did, and I would have to admit that the world-class golf courses, the tennis every night after work, the white sandy beaches, the blue crystal waters were great. The snorkeling was awesome. In fact, I told my colleagues when I went back to Temple for the summer, I said, "I found Nemo." But it wasn't about Nemo, it was about the work that I did. Let me give you a couple more examples of the stuff that I did and the stuff that's out there, and thanks for coming, enjoy your class. So, catch the rest on the video there. So, what did I do? Well, you're familiar with the company Chanel, right? Chanel was a client of the firm. My wife and I would go around the island trying to talk our way into these secret back rooms that they had at these shops for tourists to see what we could find as far as counterfeit goods go. My wife would go shopping for evidence. As I took a mental inventory of how much stuff was there, I'd go back to the office, I would call Assistant General Counsel in Paris, France, and we would decide whether to file criminal charges with the U.S. Attorney on the island or whether or not we would file a civil lawsuit. Got involved in a $25 million lawsuit involving 2 Japanese companies that wanted to build a couple of hotels and a convention center on the island of Saipan. The big guy pulled out, the little guy was left holding the bag, and so the little guy who we represented said, "You know what, we're going to sue you," to the big guy. The big guy said, "Oh yeah? We want to be in Japan if you're going to do that." So they preemptively sued us in Osaka, Japan. We turned around and we sued them in U.S. court in Saipan. Now, how does that work? Same issues, same claims, same party, same everything. Parallel litigation happens quite a bit, and here I am smack dab in the middle of it going, wow, this is really interesting stuff. Another thing, you're probably familiar with the company DHL, right? Global Shipping Company, yellow vans. DHL is a German company now by virtue of an international cross-border merger and acquisition. But when they were founded, they were actually founded by 3 individuals here in the U.S. What they did was they took the last letter, or the first letter of their last name, and that's where you get the DHL from. The H stands for Hillblum. Larry Hillblum was his name. Larry went to law school in California that a lot of people hadn't heard about, didn't have great grades, wanted to do something international. The only way that he was told to do it was to go to one of these big firms, and the big firms didn't want him. But you know what? He wanted to do something international. So he looked outside of the box, found the island of Saipan, went out there, set up a practice there, and he discovered that being in the middle of the Western Pacific, to many, might be the middle of nowhere, but in today's globalized world, it's the middle of everywhere. So he came up with this idea of a globalized shipping company. He also set up companies all throughout Asia and the Pacific and amassed this billion-dollar fortune. Now, what I've been told is this, that when people have a lot of money, they have very expensive hobbies. I'll never know that because I don't have a lot of money and I teach and I never will, but that's what I've been told. And Larry's hobby was flying airplanes. Problem was he was really bad at it. In fact, he wrecked a Learjet. He ended up spending a year in a hospital, and he would convince himself that, you know what, it wasn't his lack of flying prowess that caused the wreck, it was an unfortunate crosswind. So, as soon as he gets out of the hospital, he buys a brand new Learjet, invites 5 of his closest friends to go for a ride, and they've never seen Larry and his friends again. My firm was representing the estate, and me, the lowly intern, was tasked with finding out the laws in Japan, Korea, and the Philippines to see if we couldn't take control of the companies that Larry had set up and bring them under the US umbrella. There were attorneys from all over the world that were converging on this small island trying to get their piece of this billion-dollar pie. I thought, this is just fascinating work. Now, just a really quick aside, and I probably don't have time for it, but I'm going to throw it in anyway. We figured out why Larry liked to fly so much. As word of his death spread across the Pacific, all of a sudden all these Larry Juniors and Larry Enos started to pop up. In fact, there were like 13 of them. I don't know if you remember the late Johnny Cochran of O.J. Simpson fame. He was actually out there on the island running around with a number of these heirs trying to get, their piece of the Larry Hill balloon pie. It was fascinating stuff. I now knew that I could work at a small firm on a tropical island or basically anywhere else and do international stuff. What a great opportunity it was. So, I wanted more. During my 2L year, true to form, I actually went and I did Temple University's program in Japan from January to May. While I was there, met international attorneys, more of them, took international law classes, did hands-on practical stuff. I was able to network, meet new people that I wouldn't have been able to meet if I would have stayed in Pennsylvania. I got an internship with Temple University, with General Electric, their medical systems, over in Tokyo, doing technology transfer agreements, doing intellectual property, doing corporate compliance work. It was great, great stuff. I studied with people from around the United States. In fact, one of my colleagues was actually from Akron when I was actually over there studying as well. I met Japanese and Europeans and people that were studying in the program over there. It was a great experience. Now, I was going to stay with GE during my 2L summer on the phone ring. It was my firm from Saipan, and they said, you know, Matt, you distinguished yourself during that 1L summer. That $25 million lawsuit, the parallel litigation between the two Japanese companies, we could really use your help and expertise on that. Your international knowledge and the things that you're able to do. Can you take a year off of law school and help us out? And I went, wow, that would be a great experience between my 2L and 3L year, go out and help them. But I started to think about it, and I was going, and I told this to the partner, I said, thinking back to my 1L year, I actually went into debt to go out there and do that internship for you. Because you guys paid me, for lack of a better word, squat. If I'm taking a year off of law school, that's actually cutting into my life work expectancy. And so, I've got these student loans that I'm going to have to pay back, and that's a year less that I would be earning money to actually pay them back. And the partner said, okay, Matt, I hear you. How much money do you want? First thing that popped into my head is paying you the starting salary of a first-year associate at a big international law firm in New York City. He said, how much is that? I threw out the figure. The other end of the line, silence. Until the voice said, done. And I thought, dang, I should have asked for more. But it wasn't about the money, it was about the experience. I stayed on the island for a year. And you know what? I went through a 3.5-month jury trial. 3.5 months. How many litigators do you know that have actually done that on an international scale? And because I was the only JD on the island, I had the ability to sit at counsel's table, help out with jury selection. I got to object to the opposing side when I disagreed with the translation or the interpretation and argue with counsel during trial. It was a great experience. Now I'm back in the United States during my 3L year thinking, what do I want to do when I grow up? And those big firms that had kind of smacked me down during my 1L year, I thought, I wonder what type of international law they do, and I wonder how they would react to my resume now. So I sent it off. And I did get a lot of love letters that year, but now it was different. Because of my international experience, the phone was ringing from firms all across the United States. In fact, I had the pleasure of telling many firms that year, congratulations on your accomplishments in the past and best of luck to you in the future. You're not part of mine. It was great. So where did I end up? New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, Paris. They all sound great, right? I ended up in Orlando, Florida, by choice. My dean said, Matt, we need to talk. Called me in. He said, Matt, I know with your background, you want to do international stuff. Go to New York. That's where it's at. I said, you know what? Not necessarily. I said, if I go to New York, I'm going to get buried in the library probably for 7 years, not see the light of day. I said, I want to get out, meet people, represent clients from around the world, travel around on somebody else's dime, combine my interest in the law with things that are international. And what I discovered during my 1L year was you can do that anywhere. In fact, what I said was, I want to use my knowledge and understanding of Japan to develop an Asia law practice group for a firm. I want to be a place where my family's going to be happy.
And I know that there's international stuff everywhere. It's just a matter of finding it. So I've been doing some research, and I found that I think that Florida is a place where I can develop a practice. So this is what I did, and these are some of the things that I looked at, and this is what I pitched to the firm. Instead of the firm saying, you know what, or me saying to the firms, I want a job, I went into all of these firms saying, you know what, I've been doing some research, I can create an Asian law practice group for you and bring you clients. That was my pitch. I said, I've been doing some research and I found that there's a Japanese and an Asian presence in Florida. There's a big one here in Ohio as well. I mean, just down the road in Columbus and different places. And that's kind of what had sparked my ideas of thinking that. So I was looking for a consulate of Japan. That was my country of interest, and there was one in Miami. I looked for a trade representative. Well, Japan had based one of the trade representatives in Orlando. I looked for networking groups. There was a U.S.-Japan Networking Association in Orlando and one in Miami. A good sign. There was a school for the children of Japanese business people on Saturdays, kind of a language school. That was a really good sign. There were sister city programs between Florida cities and those in Japan. I was thinking, you know what, that's where the people, the attorneys, the business people, the other people that are interested in the country, that's where they hang out, that's where they are. If I can tap in and volunteer for those organizations or get involved, go to their activities, certainly I will be able to find opportunities there. That was my pitch. Just like my baseball story, the partners, when I was telling them that's what I was going to do, their eyes were glowing. They were so excited. In fact, the firm that I ended up with, Ackerman Centerfit, one of the partners told me in the interview, you know what, I want to hire you right now. I want to get my marketing people in here, you know, let's get this done. And you know what, I had a job a couple of hours after I finished interviewing with this really big firm. I never had that happen. And you know what? I committed to that. I thought it would be a great place for my family to go. And you know what? I want you guys to look at those type of organizations and tap into those, because that is where you can actually find stuff. Go to activities that are organized by, you know, community groups. Volunteer for sister city things. That's where some of the things are done. So what happened? Well, I went to Florida. I tapped into those. I developed my own clients. In addition, the law firm, you know, anything that was international related that came in the door, they said, oh, you know what? Matt's the international guy. Go get him involved. So I got involved in matters involving companies in the U.S. and those in Trinidad, Tobago, and Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, in Latin America, South America, in Europe, in China, in Japan. It was great. I got to fly around the world on somebody else's dime, meet different people, combine my knowledge of international things with my interest in the law. It was phenomenal. Now, after that, went in house as general counsel for one of my clients, and in 2003, Temple actually came and asked me to join their faculty and to go and run their campus over in Tokyo. And I did that for 6 years. One day I woke up and I was chief academic officer of the 3,000 student campus. I was general counsel. But I had the opportunity to work with law students from around the country. In fact, I probably worked with 6 or 7 different law students from Akron who came over during their second or third year and studied. Credits transferred back. And it was a great opportunity for them and for me to get to know them. And 3 years ago, I moved to Wyoming. Today, I continue not only to teach, but to be involved. I mean, this stuff finds you. I just got done testifying as an expert witness on Japanese law and the securities litigation actually in Los Angeles that was pending against Toyota. You know, I hope by me kind of sharing my story with you, you've gotten an idea of what international law is, the opportunities that are out there, and some of the ways that you can do it. Fortunately, I've got more time, and so I'm going to go ahead and give you some more advice and information along those lines. Now, I want to talk to you about opportunities overseas and then stuff here in the United States. Stuff overseas, I don't know if tropical islands interest you, but you know what, they're a great place to get experience. I'm not the only law professor that's actually started on a tropical island, mind you. And I know people that have actually gone there, gotten some opportunities, and have come back. One of the students that actually heard this presentation several years ago from Capital, he came over and he did Temple Japan program. He actually took a trip down to Saipan while he was there, and he landed a job. He's still there. He emailed me the other day and said, Professor Wilson, I'm sure you're going to be lecturing. Tell people it's just like living in a beer commercial, except you're practicing law. He said, I'm so happy actually doing it. But you know, tropical islands, I mean, there's Saipan, there's Guam, there's the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. They're all U.S. jurisdictions. There are other non-U.S. jurisdictions that hire U.S. lawyers because their systems are based on U.S. law. Palau, American Samoa, Costa Rica, the Caribbean, and there are different types of jobs that are out there. You could work for a general practice firm getting some great experience. Maybe doing a clerkship. You could do it with a federal court. You could do it with one of the local state courts that's actually out there as well. You could be legislative counsel. You could be corporate counsel. You could do a variety of things. So how do you find out about these opportunities? Well, one, you could go onto martindale.com. There will be listings of different things that are there. You can go onto these islands. They have their own bar associations, and the attorneys are listed that are there. You know, you might want to actually go on and find online white pages and talk to the clerks of the court that are there. Let them know that you're interested. Find out about it. Find ways to distinguish yourself. The telephone is one way to do it. Another tip, and this is something that I learned in Saipan that I want to share with you. It works internationally and domestically as well. When you're looking at those type of things, okay, and you've got it, one thing is to actually maybe make a visit. I was taught this by an attorney by the name of Matt Smith. He was graduating from a law school, not well known, he didn't have great grades, wanted to do something international. Sounds familiar, right? He decided to look outside of the box, found Saipan and Guam, sent his resumes off thinking there are no law schools here to compete against. Nobody knows about this. I'm sure I can just walk into a job. To his surprise, he got rejection letters where he got no response. Instead of giving up, though, to the firm's surprise, what he did was he turned around and sent his resumes right back to those firms. But he changed his cover letter. This time he said this, you know, I'm graduating in 5 months. I'm planning on moving to the island after law school. As a result, in 6 weeks, I'm going to fly out and I'm going to be looking for housing. I'm going to be looking for opportunities. I would like to learn more about you and your firm, your experience on the island. Can I have 30 minutes of your time to learn about that? If you're hiring, I would love to talk to you about a job, but that's not a prerequisite. The last sentence he said, I will follow up via telephone in a week to schedule an appointment. That's what he did. He gave him advance notice so it wasn't a cold call, sent him off. He picked up the phone and called. Now he had 10 different appointments that were set up. Mind you, 8 of them said, we're not hiring, but as long as you're here, we would like to meet with you. 2 of them said, we're not hiring now, but maybe sometime in the next year. At that point in time, he bought his airplane ticket. Now, I have done this. It works. But sometimes maybe it doesn't. So don't buy your airplane ticket until you've determined whether it's worth the investment. If you only get like 1 or 2 hits, you can honestly write back and say, you know, my plans have changed, but I would still appreciate the time. Can I talk to you on the phone? Become a voice, become a face. Stay away from just being a resume, and it really pays dividends. In fact, Matt went out, and on his 5th meeting, after his 5th meeting, he canceled the rest of them. You might wonder why. He had 4 job offers. All 4 of them had told him when he called that they weren't hiring. 2 of them had sent him rejection letters the first time around, and he asked one of them, don't you remember sending me a rejection letter? They said, no, we never saw your resume. We tell our secretary when resumes come in and we're not hiring just to put them in a file, send out that chain rejection letter, and we never even saw them. Asked another one of the firms, don't you remember the conversation we had 5 weeks ago when I was setting up the appointment? You said you weren't hiring. Did something change? They said, yeah. You distinguished yourself by coming in and meeting with us face to face. We believe that you can actually create some clients for us, generate some clients, and actually, go ahead and, you're worth the investment. So they created a position as well. Thanks for coming. So that's what he did. Now, I've used this, and when I followed up, attorneys have said, you know what, thanks for following up. I got so busy that, I wanted to respond, but I just lost track of your email. I've been able to set them up. I've had students that did that when they came to Tokyo to study with me. They would use that to land internships or jobs in Vietnam and China and Hong Kong and in Taiwan and the Middle East. They used that idea of going and getting the FaceTime, and it actually really worked for them. Now, opportunities overseas in non-tropical jurisdictions. Right? Everywhere you go, you will find U.S. attorneys. And you might wonder why. Well, I can tell you why. I mean, in today's world of global commerce and even, the nonprofit stuff, the language that is spoken is English. As you know from your legal studies, you've got to be exact in wording, and you're being trained in legal English, right? So you've got the ability to do that. You've got a transaction between a German company and a Chinese company. What language is it going to be in? It's going to be in English, right? The training that you receive here at Akron is much more than that in many other countries. Law is an undergraduate degree in many countries. You're getting professional training. So I've seen U.S. law students actually go into big foreign companies in their legal departments right out of law school because they have more academic training than their peers do from that country alone. So they're everywhere. And what type of jobs are there? Well, there are law firm jobs. Many people that I know just go overseas and they'll look at the U.S. firms only. But you know what? Let me use Tokyo as an example. There are U.S. attorneys that work at Japanese firms in Tokyo. There are U.S. attorneys that work at European firms in Tokyo. The reason why? that training, maybe applying U.S. law, different types of things that's really valuable. And the Japanese firm, do you need to speak a foreign language? Not necessarily. I mean, the Japanese firm, the Japanese attorneys take care of the Japanese. So, they need somebody to speak good English that's actually there. If you're bilingual, great. If you're not, there's still opportunities that are out there today. You can work for corporations, as I mentioned. The corporations, not only the legal department, but they have compliance departments and different things that you could work at. You could do international tax for somebody like PricewaterhouseCoopers. For Ernst & Young, I know like the PricewaterhouseCoopers office in Cincinnati loves to hire attorneys to actually go and prepare them for their Asian practice. I know Ernst & Young down in Columbus hires people that have some interest in Asia because a lot of their clients are actually Asian as well. So you've got those opportunities that are around you. Maybe a governmental job, a lot of people look at the Department of State, but don't stop there. I've seen attorneys get jobs with the Department of Commerce, with the Department of Agriculture, and be posted overseas. The JAG Corps is another possible example for you as well. Real estate, finance, non-traditional jobs require U.S. lawyers. They're out there for you to do. So how do you find it? Well, again, martindale.com is one way. Maybe tapping into an alumni database, maybe here at Akron or where you did your undergraduate degree, that would be another one. There are U.S. chambers of commerce that are based overseas, particularly in the major countries. Oftentimes they will have lawyering, networking organizations. Tap into them, see what's out there. Another thing is you will find legal headhunters or executive recruiters, as they're also called. They don't want to talk to law students, but don't let that deter you. Remind them you're a future client, all right? They can't place you generally, but they will talk to you and give you information, great information about who to talk to, who might be there on the ground. They will actually allow you to go out and do that. They will have kind of their nose on the job market and what's around. So think about that and how you might actually tap into those resources. Another thing is to try and maybe even consider to do a study abroad. Whether it's summer, whether it's a spring semester, whatever it is, the longer you can be overseas, the more contacts you can make. It's great to be here in Ohio, but you know what? If you can get outside of that element for a little bit, you're expanding the people that you meet, the people that you run into, and it will help distinguish you regardless of where you end up. Even if you don't want to practice overseas, being there might allow you to do it. Let me give you an example. I had somebody who really was into intellectual property. Japanese, they file a lot of patents here in the United States. Went over to Japan, made friends with like a patent agent, a couple of patent attorneys. Now they want to be, filing stuff in the United States. Now they've got a contact that they can send to once this person is actually graduated from law school. It happens. You can actually do those things. If you go and do a study abroad, though, do me a couple of favors. One is, when you put it on your resume, just don't put it as a line item, all right? Put a little description of the program and the classes that you took. I was told in law school never to put classes that you take on your resume. But you know what? I found out that when I went into interviews, that's what people talked to me about, was the classes that I had listed, the program that I had talked about on my resume. And that even happened as people were recruiting me for general counsel positions that were there. Doesn't need to be a huge long thing, but it's something that will help distinguish you, and it shows that you didn't go on vacation. When you go overseas, don't let the most important person or the most interesting person that you meet be somebody on the train between London and Paris, all right? Make sure that you have business cards. That's the international mechanism of communication. You hand somebody a business card, they hand you one back. Send them a thank you note, don't stop there. Every few months, just go ahead and send them kind of an update on what you're doing, check in and see what they're doing. Why? Well, the reason is if you ever need some job advice, if you ever need some tips, you can now call them or write to them and they know who you are. They will talk to you and they will give you suggestions and ideas. One of the students, let me give you an example. One of my students by the name of Chris, he came over to Tokyo. He decided that he was going to find these lawyer networking associations in Tokyo, and he started to hang out with an attorney at one of the big firms. Came back to the United States. This is where he wanted to stay. He wanted a job in New York. Everybody had rejected him hands down. He called up his buddy in New York and he said, you know what? He said, do you have some suggestions on how I can get in? Buddy said, you know what? I think you're great, Chris. Let me pick up the phone. He picked up the phone and called like 7 of his closest friends in New York. Chris then got interviews with all 7 of those firms, all 7 that had rejected him during his 1L year, his 2L year, and his 3L year. So I mean, he had been rejected 3 times, and that was what got him in the job. It was the connection that he actually made while he was overseas. So be thinking about that and things that are actually there. Now, let me talk about stuff here in the United States, but before I do that, just like all good things, there has to be a little bit of commercial sponsorship. And even though I'm Associate Dean at the University of Wyoming, I'm an alum of Temple Japan's program that I've talked to you about, and they fly me around the United States and talk about program. And so I actually have some brochures for you that I wanted to bring, and just considering this as one potential option for you doing a study abroad. And as I mentioned to you, every year I was there, we had students from Akron that came and did this during spring semester of their 2nd or their 3rd year. And your credits transfer back. It allows you to take international law classes that you might not have gotten anywhere else, meet international lawyers that you couldn't meet anywhere else, and depending on what your interest is, international contract drafting. A partner at a senior partner at a big international firm help you draft it. East-West negotiations, you actually get in and do with legal corporate counsel, hands-on negotiations. Maybe international human rights is something that you're interested in. Well, they have that class typically. It's taught by a professor at the United Nations University. You know that there was a United Nations University? I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was based in Tokyo. Everybody that I know that wants to get in the United Nations goes to New York and knocks on the door. But you know what? There's a research institution there where you have all these researchers that'll come over. We had a couple students actually go and volunteer for United Nations University. That's how they got their in. That's how they got their jobs in public interest, was because how many other JD students from the US were knocking on that door? Just them. Let me give you another example. Most of the students that do this program, in addition, you meet a Supreme Court justice, you do a behind-the-scenes tour of a maximum security prison. There are speakers for you to meet, other alums that you can tap into here. But just the experiences that are out there are unique. We had most of the people that do this program don't speak Japanese. They've never been to Asia, but it's one way to kind of distinguish yourself. For those that have been to Asia, it's another way to kind of enhance things that are there. But we had a Spanish speaker that came one year, and he was thinking, okay, well, in Latin America, South America, they do a lot of trade with Asia and Japan. I've got my US law degree, I've got some time in Asia, I've got my Spanish speaking skills, that'll be a great opportunity. One day he was in my office and he said, Professor Wilson, I'm here in Tokyo, I want to use my Spanish. Do you have any ideas? I said, the only thing I can think of is, maybe go to the embassies and introduce yourself and say you're an American law student that speaks Japanese, you're here for 5 months, is there anything that you can do? See what happens. Knocked on the door of the Colombian embassy. He said, can I help you guys out? This is who I am. They said, well, you know what? In about a month and a half, we have El Presidente who's coming into town on a trade mission. We're swamped getting prepared for that. Can you help us out? He said, yeah, I'd love to. A couple of weeks later, he came, sat down in my office, and he said, Professor Wilson, I've got a problem. I said, what is it? He said, the internship not working out? He said, well, that's not the case. He said, I've been invited to go on a week-long tour of Japan together with El Presidente and his delegation of all of these leaders of academics and industry from Colombia. I need a week off of class. And I said, well, typically I couldn't do that, but take the week off. So, before you know it, I'm standing actually at a black tie dinner face-to-face with the Colombian president talking about this intern and what a great job that he has done. 10 minutes we're having that conversation. Now, one of the references on this student's resume is now the president of Colombia, right? President Uribe. How difficult do you think it was for him to find a job in Washington, D.C. after graduation? It wasn't. Where else would he have had that opportunity? If he wouldn't have looked outside of the box and done something different, right? He wouldn't have been able to distinguish himself like that. And that was something that he was actually able to do in Tokyo. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And you know what? If you do things that are international, it shows that you're flexible. It shows that you can go out and do things. And so it's quite interesting to me as I look at students that have actually kind of come and done the study abroad program here and other study abroads, where they end up. People do this in Asia, they end up in the Middle East. Why? They've got the American law degree, plus, there are Asian clients that are in the Middle East. So think about different things, and different opportunities and how you might be able to kind of spin that. Now, let me talk to you about stuff here in the United States. And I've talked to you about opportunities. I mean, it really is everywhere. It can be at a small firm, medium-sized, big-sized firm. It can be at a corporation. It can be doing different things. The issue is just, finding it, because it's not going to be ready-made many times. I mean, you can go in and make it yourself. It's like my firm in Florida, right? I went in and I said, I'm going to make an Asia law practice group. Now, there are law firms that are out there that have practice groups that are devoted to different, different regions. You can look for those. That's one way to do it. But another way is to seek out those opportunities. Go to the networking events. Find stuff that the consulates are running. Attend those things. Get involved in a sister city program. Do that. Try and reach out and find attorneys that are practicing in that area. One thing that I have found is attorneys, more than anything, what do they like to talk about? Do you know? What do they like to talk about, attorneys? Themselves. That's right. So how do you leverage that? They don't want to talk about you necessarily. They certainly don't want to hear about your job search, but they love to talk about themselves. So how do you tap into that? Well, there are ways to do it, right? And if you let them talk about themselves for a while on the back end, you've been a good listener. Now you can turn the conversation and talk about yourself and what you're going to do. Some of the ways that I found kind of creative to do that are find what that attorney is working on and ask them about their work. If the attorney has written an article, talk to them about their article, all right? That's another thing to do. If you can turn yourself into a reporter, do that. Now that doesn't mean that you need to be hired by a magazine or a newspaper or something like that, but if you can put an attorney's name in print, they will be indebted to you, because to them that's publicity and you're helping them out. So if you're doing a paper for a class, if you're doing a law review article or something like that, instead of just relying on written sources, find those attorneys that are doing it and pick up the phone and call, get their name in print. Maybe, there's an International Law Society here at Akron, I think, right? Is there a newsletter? Probably not. Create a newsletter, call somebody up, say, you know what, I'm doing a newsletter or something along those lines, interview them and try and figure it out. Maybe you could do an article, like a one-page article for the Ohio State Bar Journal, or maybe for a local bar journal or a local publication or something like that. I had a law student in March when I was speaking at Florida State University come up to me. He had heard me speak a year and a half previous to that. He said, Professor Wilson, I want to thank you. I tried that, the reporter thing. He said, not only did it get me in the door, but I was able to switch the conversation on the back end, and I got an internship from them, and now I have a position after graduation with this firm that does work involving work from Latin American stuff like that. So be looking for those type of opportunities that are out there. Like I said, be creative, look for jobs that just aren't maybe what suits your definition, but goes beyond that. See what you can do to try and turn that in. Look for different opportunities. Let me kind of just share a couple of quick stories with you about things that I was able to do. One was this. One of the big things, even more than when I was in law school, that is foreign language document review in litigation. There's a lot of international litigation. If you speak a language, or maybe if you're interested in a country or something like that, you can do that. In fact, it pays quite a bit of money, anywhere from $30 to $100 an hour, if you can believe that. But when I was a third-year student in Philadelphia, people told me, oh, there's no international work in Philadelphia. And I knew that there was, absolutely. So I walked into these temporary legal staffing agencies. I knew they didn't like to talk to law students, and that's why I walked in. And I asked to talk with one of the recruiters that they had, and I sat down and I said, look, I know I'm a law student, but I can do the same thing that a paralegal can do. I can do the same thing that a legal secretary can, and I can probably even do a lot of things that an attorney can do. I want to get involved in litigation that involves foreign parties. And they said, you know what? We don't have a lot of stuff, but stuff will come in, involving companies from France. I said, that's great. I have nothing against France. I would love to be involved. I said, let me do this. I said, keep me in mind. I will follow up like every 2 weeks to see if something's in, if you don't mind. And they said, that's fine. Before I followed up, though, I had a phone call. It was from Update Legal Staffing Agency. They said, you'll never believe this, but we just had a Philadelphia firm sue a Japanese company out in California. They're looking for anybody that knows anything about Asia and Japan. We thought about you. Are you interested? I said, yes. Next morning, the phone rings. It's from another one of the staffing agencies. I said, you'll never guess. I said, let me try. Philadelphia firm just sued a Japanese company. You want me to help out? They said, yeah, how'd you know? I said, because somebody else called me last night. And they said, no. I said, we've got an exclusive on this. The improbable or the impossible now became two realities because I put myself in that position. Look for those type of things. Now, during my third year of law school, all that I did was I was in a room with a whole bunch of documents, and it was really, really boring. But you know what? It paid the bills, number one. Number two, every time I found an important document, I got a face-to-face, one-on-one with one of the senior partners at the firm. We started to talk strategy. I was able to get that FaceTime. At the end of the year, they said, Matt, we want to offer you a full-time position with the firm. I said, sorry guys, I committed to Florida 8 months ago, but I said, I've got an idea. I said, why don't you hire me as your co-counsel? When I go in on this firm in Florida, we can work on this together because I've got the international experience and you've seen how valuable it can be to you. So here I am, I haven't graduated, I'm not even licensed, I'm pitching a co-counsel deal on a $250 million lawsuit. They took the bait, all right? So I'm walking into my firm in Florida with this case in tow. Now mind you, I wasn't first chair, second or third or fourth. You know, I was just one of the peons starting out. But you know, over the next 3 years when I worked this case, my role increased. I was flying out to San Francisco on a monthly basis to do the depositions of foreign language witnesses. I got 2 all-expense paid trips to Japan where I did discovery at the other party's factory. Went through the trial, a month-long deal out in San Jose. We got a $250 million verdict. My only regret, I didn't take it on contingency. But it's not about the money, it's about the experience, and the experience was great, and that's what it did. You know, all this stuff is around you everywhere. In fact, you know, you can find advertisements for positions, and let's say the classified ads of attorneys, and even as a 1L or a 2L, I mean, those are things that you can be looking at. You know, Florida, I know that's where I'm licensed. You know, Florida has an online classified for attorneys. I'm always seeing positions that involve Spanish or Latin America or Germany or Asia. You know, make notes of those. Reach out and make contacts with those things. You know, look to maybe even volunteer. Another thing that I found that works really well is if you can find an area that you're interested in and find the attorneys that are doing it, ask them this question when you're talking to them. So, you know, there's probably something that you've always wanted to research and you've never had the time to do that. I've got some time. I would like to do some research for you. No internship, no pay, no anything. I just am interested in this area and I want to help you out. You know, what that does is it allows you to get a work product in front of somebody. Now they know who you are and what you can do. I had a student that I recommended doing this. He was interested in international commercial arbitration. He did that in Tokyo. Once he did the project, the attorney looked at it and said, hey, I've got a couple more questions. Do you mind researching that? He did. The attorney said, I've got some more questions. Do you mind researching that? He said, but I feel bad not paying you. Do you think we could do this as an internship? Student, big smile. Came back and said, Professor Wilson, your strategy actually worked. Not only did that turn into an internship, it turned into a position with this firm after law school. A position that he wouldn't have qualified for because he wasn't in the top 5% or top 10% of the class, but it got him in. You know, try and do that. People become indebted to you. I volunteered to do that at some point in time during law school. You know, 15 years later, I'm still friends with the person that I volunteered to do that with. He's introduced me to all these different attorneys and different opportunities that are out there. One other example, and then I'm done. Somebody that I met in Orlando, Florida. He went to the University of Florida, never had the chance to study abroad, took a lot of international law classes, tried to do some stuff, really wasn't sure about what international law was, but he knew that he wanted to do it. He decided coming out of law school, you know what, I'm going to set up my own practice. You know, the job search just isn't going great, I'm going to set up my own office. And he was really kind of depressed because he knew that as a solo practitioner, he would never be able to do international law. He took the Florida bar. Between the time that he took it and he was waiting for his results to come back, he decided, you know what, I'm going to go backpacking in Southeast Asia for a month. This is the last time I'm going to be able to do it. So he took off and did it. He was in Vietnam, fell in love with the country. People were great, the food was wonderful, the system he was just, you know, really, really entranced with. As he was coming back to the US, he was thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could combine my legal degree with my newfound interest in Southeast Asia? Didn't know how to do it. You know, he's a solo practitioner, he was thinking it was impossible. Well, as he was here in the US, he had that disease that I talked about. You know, you're really wanting to do something international. He really missed Southeast Asia, so he started to hang out at Vietnamese restaurants in Orlando. There's kind of a community of them, and one of the he was hanging out at, the owner had been in the US for like 8 to 10 years or something like that. And he was there late one night, he was the only one there. He struck up a conversation with the owner and he said, you know, I don't know if you ever have any legal work, but if you do, I'm a new lawyer. I would like to do it for free. The owner of the restaurant said, free legal work? Well, geez, we've got a lease negotiation coming up here in like 3 months. Can you handle it for us? And he did. He did some more legal work for him for free. And do you know what that did? Anybody in that Vietnamese community that knew that restaurant owner that ever had a legal problem, guess who got the referral? He did. In fact, he started to get referrals from people that they knew in the community, people that came into the restaurant that had issues. He's now started to have kind of a multilingual, multicultural, even some of the stuff was international in nature that he was actually doing. One day he was sitting at the restaurant again, and he continued to help this restaurant owner for free because he was getting so much business. And the owner said, you know what, we feel indebted to you for all that you've done. We want to help you out. He said, you have. You've referred me all these clients. I've got a good practice now that's international in nature. They said, no. They said, there are foreign language newspapers in the United States, including one that's in Vietnamese. We want you to draft an advertisement for your law firm. We want to make you go big time. In fact, if you can do it in English and get approval from the State Bar Association, we will translate it into Vietnamese. We will pay to run it in this newspaper. And they did. The response to that, tapping into that community, was so great that he had to go out and hire 2 attorneys for his firm, one with 8 years experience and one with 10. Number 1, to train him, but number 2, to actually help him do the work that was actually there. He had that international practice. It was great. Now I hope, through my sharing stories with you guys today, you've got an idea of what's out there and the things that you can do. Sometimes it requires a lot of creativity. You know, the networking associations, you go online, you can't find them, do you give up? Not necessarily. One of the students from the University of Texas that heard this presentation several years ago, she wrote me a thank you letter several months ago, and she said, Professor Wilson, I just want to thank you for that presentation you gave to me during your 1L year. I looked for those networking associations to get involved with international law, couldn't find any. Decided that I was going to create the International Law Society of Texas. So I sent out these invitations to all of these attorneys in Austin, Texas, inviting them to come to meetings to talk about, you know, international trade, commerce, international IP, any of those type of things to form this thing. 30 attorneys came. We set up a board. We sent out more invitations. We had 100 attorneys that came to the next one. Do you think she had problems finding jobs? Absolutely not. She was the spearhead of this organization, showing all these firms what she could do. She ended up spending 1 summer in Europe, 1 summer in South America, got a great job with a Texas firm that does a lot of international stuff. As a result of her creating this association, a lot of people know her in Texas, and she did that as a 1L. These are things that you guys can do. You've got to be creative. You've got to, you've got to kind of scrap a little bit and do things, but the opportunities are out there for you to distinguish yourself. And if you do that, you can have fascinating careers. Thank you guys a lot for your time, particularly for coming out early on a, I guess it's a Wednesday morning. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. I look forward to staying in touch with you guys through my newsletter. If I can ever be of a resource to you, just type in Matt Wilson, University of Wyoming, Matt Wilson, Japan, and I should pop up and give me a call. But anyway, thank you guys so much, and best of luck to you guys in the future.
Thank you so much. If you didn't sign in, if you would just do so for me, and please help yourself to more coffee, juice, and bagels. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Professor Wilson. This was fantastic.
Thanks. And I think everybody got on my newsletter list, so if you didn't, I don't know if you got it or not.
Yeah, come back.
I need to get on there.
I was going to say, I think